Hello and welcome to another edition of the Leader Campus Voices. My name is Mel Wildermuth, and with me is Jim Kouzes, author of the best-selling book, The Leadership Challenge, which I say is probably one of the books that many people in the training profession think is probably the Bible of leadership books. So I'm very honored to be able to interview you, and I am so excited. I'm tingling all over. So, since 2012, the biggest change. What's the biggest change you've seen in leadership, you think?
Oh, Mel, thank you for the opportunity to be with you and your campus today. It's wonderful to both be talking with you and also to have the opportunity to listen to others you've interviewed. So thanks much. I'd say, one of the things that Barry and I have learned from in the 36 now years we've been doing research together on leadership, and the 5 years since the last edition of the Leadership Challenge, fifth edition of the Leadership Challenge, we're now into the sixth. What's surprising to us is that while the context of leadership, in the context in which all leaders function, has changed dramatically since we first began doing our research.
Really?
And in the last 5 years. But the content of leadership has remained relatively stable. What was true 36 years ago is still true today in terms of the fundamentals of leadership. But we've learned a lot more. We've mined the research, we've dug a lot deeper, and we've learned a lot more about each of the fundamentals. But in essence, the content of leadership has remained the same. But the context, of course, influences how we implement these practices. So, we've just been experiencing in the last few months of 2017 an extraordinary rising up of women in the workplace, particularly in certain industries. And we have learned a lot about how leaders are, and in senior positions are treating women in the workplace, abusing women in the workplace, starting a Me Too movement, and that has become a very important movement that's changing dramatically the way organizations treat and lead women, and will, I think, open the door now for more women to be in leadership roles that will be a positive force in the workplace, but also cause us to have to learn some new behaviors, new ways of relating to each other. That's just one example. And of course, some other things that we've noticed are a growing trend toward collaboration. This is not only true in leadership, but it's particularly true in science. The data shows that when scientists collaborate with each other, their results are significantly better than if they try to go it alone. Publications in academic journals are now more likely to be co-authored than authored by only one person. This is something that's important also in leadership. We're seeing more emphasis on collaboration. And I think there's a growing phenomenon of people working remotely as more people become independent contractors and work from their homes, work remotely, and also organizations are adapting to this in the workplace, and that's become a contextual challenge for leaders. So those are some of the things that we experience, but fundamentally, the content of leadership hasn't changed all that much.
So if the content hasn't changed, with this movement of women into the hierarchy of organizations and companies, the door, or the glass ceiling, as they always refer to it, seems to be starting to shatter now. It may not be completely done, but it's starting to come down, and the movement seems to be quite forceful. What do you see is there a possibility that the context itself of leadership might change?
Well, leadership to us is not associated with position or hierarchy.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the things that we've always said, that leadership is everyone's business. And in our research early on, we didn't study senior executives. We studied more middle-level managers initially, but then we broadened that to study student leaders who often are leading volunteers who they're not paid to do what they do. So they have a different leadership context. We've applied this work to leaders in communities and volunteer organizations and education and not-for-profits. We've applied it to parents and teachers and coaches and of teams. And so we have to kind of disabuse ourselves of the notion that leadership is about hierarchy. It's not about it is about behavior and what you do. So as a parent, I can be a leader. As a coach of a team, I can be a leader. As a volunteer in a community-based organization, I can be a leader, and I can move in and out of that role. And as a team member, I can be a leader if I have a particular project I'm excited about, and I can take the lead on that project. These same behaviors and same practices apply. So yes, I think that as we become more aware that leadership isn't related to position, but is about how you behave in the organization, we'll see more people step into roles of leadership and step out of roles of leadership and share leadership with others.
So shared is the possibility then of you're talking about teamwork as well before. Is the sharing of power something that seems to be on the advance, that no longer is the hierarchy going to be as important? Things will be much more flat?
Exemplary leaders have always shared their power, and they've given it away in a sense, because they know that by making other people more powerful, they'll become more effective as leaders, because people will then feel like they can get things done without having to stop their work and go ask for permission. Mm-hmm. So the most effective leaders have always shared power. And again, I think as we learn more about what exemplary leadership looks like and see that it's about making sure that other people feel strong and efficacious and capable, and that they have the power to get things done in their domain without checking with a leader, we'll see more effective leadership in the organization at all levels.
I've never asked this question before to anyone else, but why is it seem like good or excellent leadership seems to be hard to find?
I think, Mel, as in any domain of work or practice, if you just scale leadership, if you take a look at our data, there's some people who are in up the 30th percentile, and some people at the 50th percentile, and some people at the 70th percentile. But so exemplary leadership, or exemplary performance in any field is always more difficult to attain. Mm-hmm. It takes more practice, more focus, more attention. And I think that's the basic issue. The three big factors, I think, contribute to not seeing as many exemplary leaders as we could. The first is that about 98% of organizations believe that leadership development should begin by age 21 years old. But the average age at which most managers and organizations get leadership development is 34 years old.
Oh, gee.
So that's a big gap. It's 10 years after people have started supervising someone oftentimes. We wouldn't accept that in any other profession. Imagine going to a physician who says, I'm still learning how to be a physician while I'm treating.
Okay.
I'm not yet an MD. We wouldn't go to a lawyer if they didn't have the kind of training that we would require of anyone who is going to represent us in the legal situation. Yet we accept that from leaders in organizations. Why is it that organizations don't demand that from day one people who are in leadership roles learn leadership? We're beginning to see more of that, and more universities are having leadership development programs than ever before. But that's one contributing factor. A second is that when you leave a training and development program, Mel, as you very well know, and those on the leadership campus know, that the training doesn't continue unless you follow through. Mm-hmm. And what you learn stops at the training room door if you don't follow through. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's another contributing factor, is the lack of follow through. And the third is that, it takes a lot of daily practice to become exemplary. Every professional athlete, for example, has multiple coaches and practices multiple hours a day, they don't just go home after the game and then show up to get dressed and get on the court for the next game. And yet leaders just, they end the day, they go home, they do whatever their routine is at home, and then they get up the next morning and dress to go play the game. There's no practice in between. I know it's difficult to add hours of practice to your already very busy day, but we have to find some ways to use the time during our day to practice new skills and abilities. So I think those are three contributing factors that inhibit us from becoming the best we can be.
Now, I interviewed a while back a gentleman in Singapore by the name of Marcel Donna, and he did a study with some people in Singapore about the age of the brain and the person's actual age. And he said that by the time some people get to be in their 40s or 50s and they're in those positions or they're in leadership roles, not, as you mentioned before, it doesn't have to be in the position, but he measured their brain age, which he was able to do in this study that he was able to accomplish. And the brain ages were like in the 70s. Do we really put that much pressure on individuals? Have you seen as pressure increased in the years from the first publication of the Leadership Challenge?
Well, I think that is a concern. You can see that in the tenure of CEOs in organizations that it's getting shorter. And that may be a contributing factor. I wasn't aware of the research you're talking about, but it makes perfect sense to me. If you take a look at the president prior to the current one, Barack Obama, you take a look at a picture in year one and then 8 years later, and yeah, gray hair that came in, how the face looked much more challenged and tired. And then after he's out of office for a while, he looks youthful again. So I do think that a job like that with high uncertainty and high pressure certainly does age people. And I would imagine that affects the brain as well. And there is, if you were to ask people, what's the one description that you'd say is true about the current environment in which you work? How would you describe the current environment in which you work? Probably the number one descriptor would include something like volatile or uncertain or changing or challenging or adverse. And so, yeah, these days people are experiencing a lot more of the churn and adversity than in when we first started studying.
Now, the Leadership Challenge has been translated, according to your material on your LinkedIn page, 22 languages. So what do you think is the most difficult aspect of leadership to get across in those 22 languages?
Well, interestingly, the practice which is the most challenging for leaders is actually consistent across cultures. We've gathered data from 72 different countries, and if you take a look at the data by region, for example, you'll find that the lowest scoring practice is the same across all cultures, and that's inspire a shared vision. And so, it's challenging for everyone to engage in certain things. The pattern, the absolute numbers for highs and lows may vary, but the pattern of practices remains rather consistent across cultures, which is both reassuring, meaning you don't need to learn a different model to go practice leadership in another culture. The fundamentals, going again back to what we talked about at the top of our interview, that the fundamentals of leadership apply cross-culturally. It's the nuances or the how you implement each of those practices that differs. So if I'm in a Middle Eastern country, how I apply these practices might vary a little bit. Or if I'm in United Kingdom, or if I'm in Australia, or if I'm in South America, how the specifics of what I do might vary, but the pattern has remained relatively constant across cultures.
Interesting. I did not know that, obviously. What do you think the number one way is a leader can kill their credibility? Because credibility seems to be the base of the pyramid, you might say, for leadership itself, no matter what position you might be in.
Well, you're absolutely right. One of the other pieces of research we did, beside looking at best practices, essentially, what are you doing when you're at your best as a leader, which was the question we asked 36 years, well, really 37 years ago when we first started doing this research. But we also asked constituents, what do you look for and admire in a leader? Someone whose direction you would willingly follow. Emphasis on willingly. And the number one category of characteristics was credibility. Okay. Credibility, we learned, is the foundation of leadership. If you don't believe in the messenger, you're not going to believe the message. And of the factors which make up personal credibility, two, trustworthiness or honesty, expertise, and competence are the most important ones in earning credibility. So we lose our credibility in two fundamental ways. Okay. First of all, when we aren't perceived as being trustworthy by other people, when they think we're lying to them, or we're disabusing the facts.
I like that term, disabusing the facts.
And so we lose credibility when we lose trustworthiness. We also lose credibility when we may be a perfectly trustworthy person, someone who always keeps their word, but we lack competence to do the job. And so we just don't have the skills and abilities to make something happen. If you apply it to an organization may say, we're going to improve the quality of our products. That's a promise. We promise that to our customers. But they have no program in place to develop people to learn how to do TQM and other ways in which you can make sure that you produce the quality products. So you lose credibility because you don't have the competence to deliver on a promise. Those are the two fundamental ways that we lose our personal credibility. But the number one way is we just lack the trust. Other people don't trust us to keep our word, to follow through on our promises, don't believe what we're saying. That's the number one killer.
Therefore, if that's the number one killer, is that contributing to some extent to what you had mentioned before? A gentleman dresses up, or a woman dresses up, goes into work, does her leadership there, comes home, and doesn't practice anything anymore. Does that lose some credibility within the corporation to try and develop their leadership?
Well, because credibility is the foundation of leadership, if people lose they're not consistent in their behaviors within the organization and outside the organization.
Yeah. I told you about Frisky. Frisky came in. I was interviewing Dr. Sylvia LaFair, and Frisky got in on that interview. So I think she just wanted to beat you, Jim.
I'm glad. Hi, Frisky.
She's so
pretty.
so enamored. Sit down, sweetie. Okay, go ahead.
So we were just saying, I think that credibility, which comes from the word credo or a belief, begins with identifying a set of values and beliefs that are important to you and that you can be consistent with at home and at work. And it's the lack of consistency between what you say you value or an organization says it values and and how you behave. It's that inconsistency that's critical.
Is that why when people go into their positions, in many cases, one of the questions that I have always asked people to say is, find out what the stories are, that what they say that they're going to do and what the stories that come down through the ages of the company sometimes are two different things. Is that what we're talking about to some extent as well?
Yeah. So I love storytelling because it is in fact how we gathered our initial information that helped us to form the model. And when you look at the narrative that people, when you ask people to talk about their organization and you look at the narrative, the themes that come together as people talk about your leadership in your organization. That is such valuable information to have. And so if the stories are about someone who says one thing and does another, promises to do things but never follows through, talks a good game, but really when you look at what they do, they're not practicing what they preach. Those come out in the stories.
Mm-hmm. People tell. Okay. Should a leader, when they're put into position of power, when they're actually put into the position of power, should that leader be concerned about their legacy?
Well, one of the quality that differentiates leaders from other credible people, a team member, as an example, is the ability to be forward-looking and to be able to inspire a shared vision of the future. That differentiates leaders from individual contributors and from team members. And that's based on the data that we've gathered. That's the quality that stands out when you ask people to talk about colleagues versus leaders, is the ability to be forward-looking, to inspire a shared vision, to list others in a common vision. And so in that sense, leaders must be concerned about the legacy. That is the long-term, what they're going to leave behind when they move on to do other things. And so I like to have people think about 4 things when they're thinking about legacy.
Okay.
And this would apply at home and at work. Think about 4 things, and the acronym is LIFE, L-I-F-E. What are the lessons that you want people to learn during the time you're leading? What is it that you hope to teach people? What are the ideals that you stand for? And the lessons and ideals may be very related to each other. What are the ideals that you stand for? What are the feelings that you want people to have when they're around you? How do you want them to feel? What's the affect you want to create? And what's going to be the evidence that you have made a difference in your leadership? LIFE, lessons, ideals, feelings, and evidence. And you can apply that concept, that construct to the work that you do in the workplace or at home or in the community. When people talk about me or you or anyone who might be listening to our dialogue, what do we hope that they're saying about what they're learning from us? What do we hope they're saying about the ideals that we stand for? What are we hoping they will feel when they're around us? And what are we hoping they will say we've accomplished? The evidence that we've made a difference.
Well, I am blown away. I am absolutely blown away. I think that's the place where we're just going to have to leave it. We'll ask them directly, what is it that you're getting from these interviews, and what is it that hopefully the legacy that we're going to leave behind, Jim, as well as myself, as well as all the other people we've interviewed thus far and will continue to interview, what kind of evidence are we leaving behind to try to make this position the number one place to go to in any kind of leadership question? That was always been my purpose, to set this up.
Wonderful.
And I thank you so very much for your contribution. And please pass along to Dr. Posner our best as well. He said that you would represent the two of them well when I asked him to come aboard as well. And I think that you have represented both of you in a fantastic manner. So I appreciate it so much, Jim. I appreciate it greatly. Ladies and gentlemen, give you a chance to plug as one of the free aspects of being interviewed. If you want anything to plug, go ahead and plug away for the next few seconds.
People can find out, Mel, more about what we do by going to leadershipchallenge.com, which is our website, and we have all the products and services and the books and things that we offer. It's a free newsletter and all that. So I invite anyone who is interested to go to leadershipchallenge.com. And in February, March of this year, we're coming out with the 3rd edition of the Student Leadership Challenge.
Oh, really?
And we're coming out with a new book called Stop Selling and Start Leading. and it applies the 5 practices to the art of selling. And it's not about sales leadership, it's about seller-buyer relationships. So that's our newest book coming out this winter.
Just one last question then about this. Is there, I don't want to bring politics into it, but when somebody gets into a position of power, what is necessary for them to turn it from their ladder, or climbing the ladder, if you want to call it, or their efforts to get to that spot, and once they've obtained the spot, how does that idea change a bit from what you might say in political standards, the campaign versus actually running from the position?
Well, when you're campaigning for something, you're obviously looking for supporters who will back you and vote for you in a political environment. And similarly, if you will, you don't get a vote in an organization, but you're looking for support. But when you move into a position where you're now leading an entire organization, you're no longer just talking to your supporters. You're talking to everyone. And if you want people to get on board with your policies, you can't just be talking about, you can't talk about them negatively. You can't put them down. You have to invite them in ways that make them see that their interests, hopes, dreams, and aspirations can be served as well. If you're divisive and you talk negatively about others and you intentionally create conflict between groups in order to win more support from those people who have already supported you, you inevitably will fail. It's guaranteed. You will not accomplish what you intend to accomplish. You may be able to strong arm for a while just because of the power of the position, but it's certain that you will fail if you don't make that transition from looking at this as a campaign to looking at this as enlisting everyone in a shared vision of the future.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate it, especially the last, you're just the best. You really are. Take care, and thank you so much for the interview.
My pleasure.